Sorry. Do I need to start over?
No, ma'am, you're good.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Is there any other questions or correction? There being none, all those approved signify by saying aye. And no, nay by nay. All right, thank you. I have some committee members that's going to have to leave, so as we go through, because we got a closed session item too, that we are going to move pretty quick through our presentations, okay? Bill, you're up. You're the first one for your, did you want to do the annual incentive now? Okay. 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 I can't see that anyway, so.
As you might recall, this has been presented to this committee the last time we met. And we talked about perhaps taking another look at the stretch levels of performance. And we've done that. And this is the outcome of that discussion. We have suggested that we add one additional metric to this plan, and that's around specialty care access. We had talked about perhaps considering that goal for our long-term incentive plan, but through discussions, we realized that we need immediate improvement and it more of an annual goal. It fits with the days to next third new appointment. So we suggested that we add that to the population health metric. Each of those would be worth 10% of that overall 20% section. This measures the days from referral to actual appointment for GI, pulmonology, endocrinology, and urology, all of which have great impact and import on our geriatric population. Orthopedics, one of those as well. We debated about including orthopedics in that, but the days that we're looking at right now are in the mid-50s, much more acceptable than what we're looking at for these particular specialties. As you can see, it's actual is 102 days, from days of referral to actual appointment. Way too many, and they end up in our ED. They end up with conditions that could have been addressed earlier. So we think it's a very good goal to include in our annual incentive plan. The stretch targets probably are a little bit new to you in that we didn't present those before, but through discussions with Dorothy and DT and some of our other staff, we're bringing this forward to you as a recommendation for the fiscal year 18 incentive plan, which began October. We're a little long in the tooth on this. We're almost to the midpoint of the fiscal year, but I can tell you that our staff has been aware of what the performance indicators were since September. They just didn't know exactly what the levels of performance and the expectations around those would be, but they have been working toward improving each of these indicators for some time. The only curveball, so to speak, would have been the specialty care access. But that's something that's been underway for some time as well.
Okay.
So unless there's questions or any other thoughts, I would present this as a recommendation to the HR committee for approval for the fiscal year 18 annual incentive plan.
Okay. All right. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Got my mic on now. There was a lot of discussion with staff, and I had a personal phone call with staff concerning the financial metrics.
Yes.
And that's not that concern hasn't changed. I know that we're in the process of doing a productivity study that is going to create for us a better system of data that will allow us to hopefully waterfall financial metrics to a point that they become more meaningful for the whole organization. I'm still not comfortable that this is the right metric.
Okay,
And I'm probably the lone ranger on this one, but I think that, giving it a 20% weight when the variable is as, I'm going to call it benign as it is, when it comes to really measuring financial performance,
okay,
I have difficulty with it. And I hope that, and I know staff is headed this direction because they've already assured me of this, as we move toward better financial accountability associated with performance, I hope that we're able to integrate some of the components that we've even talked about today. I mean, having a full panel of physicians matters,
right.
to the financial bottom line. We saw that today in the Finance Committee. So I hope that through the productivity study, we're able to get to the point where our financial metrics become as meaningful and as thought through as these other metrics are. I'm just not at the point that I believe that they are yet.
All right. Okay, you mentioned the weight of having them all equal at 20. I know we are doing some things, and I do hear you, and I know Sharon and I, DT, Sullivan, Steve Sullivan, we're trying to work on making it more meaningful. We were looking at doing that on the long term, but on this one, if one of your concern is the weighted, we can also look at the weighted on this and change that.
I would yield to the committee's preference there, and it is probably, in the big scheme of things, taking 5% off this and adding 5% somewhere else, service, for example, in many ways would benefit staff, because in fact it would put us being able to measure the things that we're good at, having a higher weight, and ultimately reduce the reliance on the financials. So to some extent, we're kind of arguing against ourselves if we do that.
Okay.
My only point is that to keep it at that level of weight gives it credibility when it comes to the overall comparison.
Okay.
And I just can't do that. So I'm not making a motion that we would change the weight. I'm only
Okay.
making the observation that
Okay.
compared to the others, it's still a problem.
Yeah, Chair, my comment on that, you expressed that even last year when we were trying to consider compensation. So I think that's been an ongoing concern.
That's
Is how,
been very responsive to that.
no question. And again, I think I would check the HR chair, but ultimately, if there is an issue or something is totally outside staff's ability to handle in the finance areas, I would hope the board would have the ability to step up and address those issues and not penalize if there's something so far outside their ability to deal with it. So, but again, I think your points are well made.
Okay. Bill did not mention, but under the perception of care, we spent a lot of time making sure that we are comparing ourselves to like organizations, like for the ED, they changed it from just general to looking at trauma hospitals, and so we've spent some time trying to make sure that we have decent measurement. We're going to spend as much time trying to work on those financial ones so that next year, Trent's going to say, good job. Are there any other discussions on it? Yes.
I kind of was in the same boat with Trent. I want to ask Trent, when he looked at finance, were you feeling that should have been less than 20%?
No, not necessarily. I don't disagree with the weight. What I disagree with is the metric.
Measurements.
To me, the metric doesn't really represent a stretch in light of our historic performance. And, an argument could be made that we as a public hospital, completely reliant upon uncompensated care and DSRIP and funding sources that have nothing to do with commercial payers, could make a pretty good argument that keeping that at a 20% weight is dubious anyway. And I think you could make that argument and say that, we are going to do what we have to do regardless of our financial, performance, and that our financial performance is only to some extent discretionary based on our service. But within that area, that discretionary area, then to the extent that we can measure all of those elements as best we can and tie them throughout the organization, at least then within that discretionary area, we've applied as strict a performance criteria as we can. That's where I would like to be able to be. And I think ultimately we can get there, but we'll never change the fact that as a public hospital system, the ultimate did we make or not make margin, I think is a very secondary question.
We also in transformation
Yeah.
for more quality,
Yeah.
reaching out patients,
Yeah.
that, changing contracts and all that stuff.
Right.
We might not invest properly because it's a market.
We have to be able to reduce our cost for a number of reasons.
Right.
And that particular issue is being addressed in the long-term incentive plan, and it does have, at least in my opinion, applicability to an annual plan at some
Yeah.
point. I think as we become more proficient and finance develops the cost accounting system, we will be in a much better position to be able to drill down and determine where our actual costs are that we can influence. So, yeah, it's not here. There is a metric that we can talk about when we talk about the LTIP that may in fact begin to address the expenses that this organization has somewhat of a control over.
Instead of operating margin, then would it be reduced cost by X% be better?
Maybe. I mean, it's certainly more direct.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cost per admission,
Right.
cost per discharge.
Right.
I don't know the right one, but I think it's a series of them. And
We've suggested a cost per adjusted admission in the long-term incentive plan.
yeah. Hit your mic.
I know it's important on number 5 to have human resource, but I've never seen an executive compensation is based on engagement of the employee. It's kind of given. So I'm not sure if it's have to have its own box with 20% by itself. But talking about that in HR committee is kind of a dumb thing to do, but all right.
Well, I'll let Peel address that. But one of the deals, when we talked about that, we talked if your employees are not engaged, you're not going to meet a whole bunch of these things. If you have employees that don't care about what you're doing and they are not engaged in working with you, then all of your numbers should go the opposite direction. So that was one of the reasons we had put that engagement. And that is also one of those, DT, that we spent a lot of time reevaluating and saying, is there something else that we could do? We always want our employees to be engaged, but is there one inside of that group that we could look at that we wanted to move up? We've done an outstanding job in that. And one of my concerns is that is 5, and we're at 4.39. I don't, that's a stretch for us to stay there. But you're at the 92nd percentile. So we have discussed that and talked about, was there anything else? So I think as we go along, we are going to continue to have conversations, and we will be changing some things, because there should be some things that we were doing. We want to look at turnover, but even with turnover, you still have to have engaged employees, or you're going to have more turnover. So that was one of the reasons. Yes, Roger.
Bill, you said that the adjusted patient day is in the long-term incentive?
It is a proposed one of 2 metrics in the long-term incentive plan.
Is there
We
any
know exactly what our baseline is, have known that for some time. We haven't focused on that as an organization, and that's the only thing that we really can control. We can't control the revenue.
Sure.
We can't control the funding. We can control the expenses to a great degree.
Should we not just put that in right now, in this incentive plan? In lieu of the operating margin?
Certainly,
I mean, there seems to be enough discussion that may not
It
be
is
the
an
best
issue
measure.
for all of the board members in
Yeah.
here. It really is. And so, Sharon, you're awful quiet back there. come on up so you can be a part of, because it is important, and you do have several board members that
You have a little bit of a caramel
it's-
pie in your teeth. there.
may be moving.
Oh,
out of
that was a
longer than
cookie.
short.
Yeah. That's okay. So, you know, as Bill and I have been studying what we could do for a long-term incentive, they're all financial metrics. So it's really what I think the board wants to see. There's an education that has to happen, and from my perspective, we are kind of into the fiscal year. We're almost to the end of January now. So one thing to consider would be the annual incentive plan impacts the entire organization. The long-term incentive plan is more the executive level, and it's also a 3-year plan. That's one thought that I had while I was sitting at the table. The hospital operating margin is something that we've been focusing on for a while. We will start to focus this year and educate people what drives the hospital, the cost per adjusted admission is what we're beginning to discuss, and we'll discuss here in a second. For the LTIP, that is not a calculation that's familiar to the organization. That is not something that we talk about at leadership today. It is a calculation that is used across the industry. And again, that is focused on costs. It can vary based on if your admissions increase or if your volumes increase. It can be negatively impacted if for some reason volumes decrease from budget. Same with any of those other financial metrics. So there's pros and cons to both. I can't really make a recommendation at this point. Probably the one time I'll sit here and tell you I don't think I can recommend what metric needs to go in the AIP versus the LTIP.
I'm not sure they couldn't go in both.
I was going to say,
Because we struggle with margin. We struggle with margin all the time because of lack of control and influence about what that's going to look like. We struggled with the trigger for the annual incentive plan last year because we got hit a second year with a $10 million hickey.
Yeah.
And what do you do about that? So I don't have any problem swapping out the margin metric with the cost per adjusted admission.
It's at least something more that we can control.
It
More
is.
I mean, we set the margin in there and the trigger, and as Bill alluded to and commented before, you're going to get a legislative pen slash from Washington and the state. It doesn't matter what we do. It doesn't matter how efficient we are. In fact, I'd argue to you that some of the formula funding that is in existence, the more efficient you are, sometimes the more you're hit. You're more penalized. So I think it's not a bad idea to put a measure in there that we have the greatest level of control over. And then the onus is on us and y'all as a board from the direction standpoint and from us from a lifting standpoint to do what we need to do.
And I don't have a problem with keeping the FTE per adjusted occupied bed in there either because it's very tangible.
That's right.
Folks understand what that is. It's a component of your cost per adjusted admission as well. That's not double dipping to me.
It is not.
That's focus.
No,
right?
it's focus.
And from a financial standpoint, the FTE, that is probably the one metric on that page that, and employee engagement, that every leader in this organization has control and an impact over at any given time. It's also the main driver of that operating cost and margin. So I would hate to see that one be replaced at any point in time.
Oh, I didn't think that was the one that.
No,
was
I
shut
just
down.
wanted to say it.
What,
So
doctor?
I'm a simple ER doc, so we do things according to the value equation of outcomes and access over cost. And you have outcomes metrics here, you've got access metrics here, and to me, cost would make much more sense because then you satisfy the value equation. And that's, so my 2 cents worth for what it's worth.
Mr. Chairman, I hear saying that we swap that out, i.e. margin, and go with cost per adjusted admission, which is a little bit more.
I heard it, that's okay, I'll let you.
We can certainly follow that, it kind of gets us away, and I'm not picking on, but we've had commissioners and everybody up with these arbitrary, you need to move to 2%, you need to have 1%, I mean, we've been through that in the budgeting process. We kind of get away back to the educational theory, we get back and put it on what we can control and what our staff.
Correct.
And the idea of that compensation and having stretch goals, you want your staffs to have the opportunity to get there. And to me, that's a better adjustment of that. I'd rather do that than change the weighting, because sitting here looking at bonds, all that, I want to show that finance is just as important as a piece of this organization, that we leave finance as a major component. I think that's a fair way to take care of our staff, which is what this is all about.
All right, I saw somebody else's hand. Okay.
I have a question. What do you mean by adjusted patient day when you talk about costs?
Sharon's going to
That's
tell you
mine.
what that formula is,
You-
because it's
I
about
don't know why he
outpatient
started to talk.
revenue and visits
Should
and,
I have just,
no.
No.
She's
Just
fluent
spend
in
some time
that.
with me on it too.
So there is a metric in hospital finance in which we've created, and this is industry-wide, where there's not really a good way to add inpatient volume and outpatient volume, because a patient day is not equivalent to a radiology procedure. It's not equivalent to you can't add an inpatient surgery and an outpatient surgery. So we take overall revenue and we create a factor, and then we decide that that's kind of an adjusted patient day. So whatever a patient day equates to in revenue, we take total revenue and we divide total revenue by an average patient day, what that revenue per patient day is. And that turns into an adjusted volume for us. And I'll walk you through that calculation. And so you can't really, yeah, you can't really think of it as a volume number, but it's kind of a conversion of your revenue to come up with an overall weighting of how much business did I do over my total cost. Because your overall costs are driven by both your inpatient, your ancillaries, and your outpatient visits. And there's not one metric in a hospital system that measures what you have done across the board. And that's what any adjusted patient factor does. We do the same with the FTEs per adjusted patient day.
with the same type of?
It is the same type of calculation. This is a much bigger number because it's per adjusted admission, which is about the same as an adjusted discharge. So it's just a bigger number. You have the same, we capture admission. So this number that we're proposing is based on adjusted admissions.
Adjusted admission?
Okay, any other questions on that? Because what has been suggested or recommended is that we change the hospital operating to cost per adjusted admission, right? Is that-
Correct.
Okay, and then you have some numbers, you'll come back with some numbers for threshold, stretch, and all those, right? Okay.
Yes.
And I know you have some stuff you're gonna talk to us on LTIP about. Is that the same that you're gonna use?
It is.
Wait,
Okay.
correct me where I'm wrong on this. I have been told that it's the physician's pen that accounts for most of the costs of any patient in a hospital. inpatient or observation status, like what the physician writes, where they get admitted, what lab tests are ordered,
How long they're
et
here?
cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Should we not be looking at that type of thing
We
all
are.
the time?
It's a component, Dr. Weber. It is a component. Labor is 55% of our overall operating expense. I don't know off the top of my head how much to equate to that click of a button or flick of a pen,
That's right.
but it's extensive. We've got utilization issues that we know about today, and we're addressing those today. We've got situations where orders are made for patients who have had similar procedures in the last few weeks.
Right.
You know, repeat tests that don't need to be made, and that's a large cost to this organization. So it's a two-pronged approach.
Should that not be one of the things we look at?
If you can go down that path, you should look, it's specialty.
Couldn't
So
be.
you will have to look at the total cost of care to see what they do post-acute and everything else. So hopefully eventually over time, we start looking at how do we manage the whole thing. Then you can see patterns and everything else so they can go back in an educated way and talk and sit down and counsel.
See, that's what I thought we'd get if we talked about cost, exactly what you just said.
Yep. And then you're gonna have to let more data in so that you can look at to see, so they don't argue like patient sicker than yours, type of thing, all that stuff, and then take the all that out of the way so that you can measure everybody the same way, and then you can look at patterns, and then it's a long concept. I think that's something that we may want to discuss down the road to get to that level, but just to pull one out and just measure one specialty, we got ourselves in trouble.
I think this is a good start, Chuck.
Why not?
Yeah, I think this is a better way to assess.
That's part of the rationale around having service line chiefs as well.
Alright.
Leaders in place who get it, who understand it, who are responsible
The
for
service
it.
line chiefs have to have access
Absolutely.
to this data, and I don't think they have that right now.
Right.
Okay. Trent, better?
Yes, ma'am.
That's a lot better.
Wait, quick question,
T?
because I know we plan from a committee and collaboration. Want to hear from leadership, is this what we propose? Is that a fair way for you guys to measure and look at to run your day-to-day business? So that, we don't want to throw something that's
I've given you my
unfair.
opinion, just one.
Yeah.
Well, let's be fair to staff. Staff has started looking at costs because Trent had made it, you're right. Trent had talked about it and others had called me about it, but staff has started working at saying, let's look at that as part of our long-term incentive. What we've done now is said, okay, let's bring it over to the annual, which ties back into your long-term, because if you don't reduce costs, we're gonna have problems. So they have been looking at it, and they have some recommendations, so I do appreciate that, and we would just move it over. What she was gonna show us for long-term, it'll now be over here, and they'll be giving that to us pretty soon, okay?
Steve's committee be looking at this regularly.
You have the hard copies at your desk.
Well, I mean, I think as a board, you all look at it, and you'll, yes. It's all inclusive, because you can't take one element out of this and say it's finance. There's quality involved in this, there's finance involved in it. It is universal throughout the organization.
So Dorothy, this will come back with the metrics change.
Right.
I.e. to the cost per adjusted admission, and then Sharon will give us kind of the threshold, the target. Because I'm just sitting there thinking, this is affecting something that about 5 months is already, we're already into this budget.
Well, we do want to caution y'all, because a lot of times you'll subliminally think it's first of the year, but
Yeah.
we've already lost
Yeah, we're about 5 months.
because we're starting in October, so we put everybody a little bit behind, and it's really challenging.
Yeah.
Well, we'll just look at it from the day forward, and I won't criticize you for the 2 months we missed. We'll just do it over the next one. I think that's where we are, okay?
Thank you for that question, DG.
Okay, anything? We're okay with all the changes? Everything else is okay?
Yeah.
So do I get that in the form of a motion? Okay? All right. Are there any other questions? All right. All those that approve signify by saying aye. Aye. All right, we done. We're done on that one.
Okay, long-term incentive. Let me remind you of the discussions we've had previously. We had a long-term incentive plan that was approved by this HR committee and the board 2 years ago. We're in the third year of that long-term incentive plan. We are recommending that we change the metrics, and that's not something that we come to a decision lightly. But the original metrics that we had were good at the time. As we become more understanding of the plan and the vision and the direction this organization needs to take, we thought it was an opportune time to change the long-term metrics that would benefit the patients this organization serves. Leapfrog, albeit controversial, is a rather well-known indicator of a lot of things: quality, process, patient satisfaction, cost. There's about 30 different metrics that combine into one letter grade. We're not recommending that we focus on the letter grade. We're recommending that we use the metric and focus on improvement over self in relation to a letter grade that might be awarded. Now, if you look historically at Leapfrog as an organization, there's a very tight concentration of scores around letter grades. They haven't moved that much historically. They just don't. So we're recommending that, given where we have come from, that we focus on an improvement over self for threshold to equal at least what we achieved in 2017. Now, remember, the methodology around that is the threshold should be achieved relatively 90% of the time. So we've got to maintain our position to achieve threshold. But we're recommending we need to move to an A. And you move to an A by moving progressively through a B. So we'd like to recommend that the target for 2018 is close to a B, but numerically it is an increase over self. Doesn't seem like much. Optics being what they are, doesn't look like much, but it's pretty significant. Dorothy's had a lot of conversation, I think, with Leapfrog organization. I think she's a believer that small numbers mean a lot in this type of a metric, right? The stretch target ought to be an A. It's kind of like a journey to zero. That's the ultimate goal. Now, there's different scores around an A. There's a range. There's a range from like 3.159 that we're recommending to 4. 4 is the most you can get. An A is an A. Well, it's not really. But we think that we want to focus on numbers that historically have an equivalent to a letter grade. So if we hit 3.159, it might not be an A. It might not. It might be a B. We don't know that. Therefore, the significance of the numbers representing the composite. The second metric that we're recommending we change is to focus on the cost that we spent a lot of time talking about just before in the annual incentive plan. And this is around cost per adjusted admission. You see our baseline there. We think that budget in this case, which is 14,863, ought to be threshold. Because really the whole focus over a long-term perspective is to reduce your overall cost. It's not to make it a target and then, oh, it's okay if you increase your cost, we'll incent you. That's not what this is about. This organization must focus on reduction in expenses. So if you set your budget at threshold, then you have incremental improvements going forward. We are saying, again, optics being what they are, doesn't look like a lot of money, but this movement from threshold to target is around $3.5 million. This movement from threshold to stretch is $5 million. So if we're able to save $5 million in operating expenses and our admissions and our outpatient revenue as adjusted stays the same, our overall cost per adjusted admission would be $14,785. That's how that works. Now, long-term, do we need to be better than that? Yeah, we do. Sharon has done some comparisons with the other public hospitals in Texas, and every one of those except for Lubbock, which is a little bit different, is much higher than JPS. Do you have those readily?
Yeah, and Harris County was also slightly lower. I'm not sure, we don't have the full information, but on average, excluding Lubbock, if you take the big five in Texas, the average cost was $16,617, and that was back in fiscal year 16 was the information that we're able to capture publicly. So just to give you a relevance to the other public hospitals in Texas, including JPS.
Do y'all consider the baseline of 17 an anomaly relative to these threshold and target numbers?
The difference in the baseline of what we actually accomplished in fiscal year 17 and threshold is budget, and that's about 5.5% increase in operating expenses, and I think that's exactly where our budget was.
Did anyone else have any questions? Or comments? No. Go ahead.
I'm sure I heard you properly. Our baseline for year 17 is 14,075.
Yes, sir.
But for the 5 hospitals across Texas,
The big five public hospitals.
some
For fiscal year 16, it was just under 17,000, but the calculation was $16,617. So JPS is less than the average of the big five, but that number is from 2 years ago. From the public information that's available.
if I interpret properly what I'm hearing is we are still cost-wise doing far better than the other 5 public hospitals, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So if
We're doing better than 3 of our peer group.
Are they level 1 trauma center too?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
We tried to do apples to apples.
I agree that we should change, and it's a good metric. I just was surprised that it was that different.
Now, things may change when the 17 data is available, but trying to compare.
Do you
Like
use, Sharon, do you
information.
use all revenue streams as your numerator when you come up with that cost calculation?
No, that's patient revenue. So that's inpatient and outpatient charges that comes to make that adjusted patient admission factor.
Shane, this is where I'm struggling, right? Because if they have a better program, most of the hospitals try not to they look at the system, so they try not to put patient in the hospital. It's only severe and meet certain criteria to be admitted, then the cost may be high, but it's better to have high there, but decrease the overall cost when you combine them. So I'm struggling a little bit.
The comparison is just one factor. So I think what the LTIP metric is, the purpose of the LTIP metric, at least in my mind, is to look inward at JPS to make sure that we are reducing costs where we can reduce them. Granted that the study for the big five and the $17,000 number that I threw out from fiscal year 16, that was really just intended not to say that we're doing that much better, but just as a relativity, were we in the ballpark? I do think we're in the ballpark, and I think we're there, but I do think that from our institution that we do have opportunities, and it would be a healthy metric for the district.
My own concern, as you do a better job, as you move more toward, like a better water accountable care organization type thing,
Yeah.
then your costs inside the hospital should go up, but it's just shrinking in census.
Because you have fewer patients.
Right.
Because you want to treat them before
Yeah,
you get in there.
good.
Yes.
So that may put you in a bound as you do that, because, but for me, my biggest problem is, and I made this known also as well, I like the yearly performance to be strict, because that's helping to measure performance. But my health tip, for me, it still wraps around employee retention. If they met everything they do on a yearly basis, they should remain on payroll, and the rest is incentive to stay on and as a reward, so that we don't have a lot of turnover, because you don't want to lose IP, you don't want to lose recruiting, because every time you have gaps affecting your revenue and everything else. So that's for me.
So you see your long-term program is more, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, you correct me if I'm wrong, it's more like stock options for the private sector.
Yes, it's for them to stay as a reward for staying.
I think DT's argument is the long-term payment plan is a, correct me if I'm wrong, is a retention plan.
Correct.
To retain your top talent.
Right.
And keep them as an incentive to stay for that 3-year period of time, and that 3-year period of time, as opposed to viewing it as an incentive type plan. And it's what corporate America does, private corporate America does, from a stock option type plan. The longer you are, the more stock options you get to give you the incentive to keep, 1, productivity, but 2, longevity for your best people. So your view is this is a longevity type model, as opposed to just looking at it from an incentive standpoint. It should be
The
looked
last one
upon
is
as,
the one, do we have enough building blocks to get to our destination? That's the yearly one, because if you're not the right player, you shouldn't be part of our team.
Exactly. Okay.
Right.
Accountability's at that other level.
Accountability is at your first year, and if you're not succeeding at your first year, you never
level.
get your 3.
That's right.
And your 3 is the benefit of you stay on longer here at JPS
And meeting the goals and objectives.
and meet
of
the
the
goals and
organization.
objectives. I get it.
Sharon, when you were comparing this, like your baseline to 17, did you look at your baseline for any other year? Because I'm trying to make sure that your baseline for 17 is 14,075, and then you go to budget. You based it on budget, and I'm trying to see if you looked at another year to see if your actual was actually better than the budget that you put together. As you know, that makes sense to you?
Yes, and 17 was better than budget, and that was mainly due to the overage in our volumes. So if you think about the denominator and the volumes that we push through, but our expenses did not go up as much as our volumes did. So we were able to control our expenses were over budget, our fixed budget, but because that's a variable, it's a per unit calculation, and we volume adjusted that calculation, it came in under budget because we pushed more volume through and our expenses did not go up proportionately
And so,
in 17.
Okay.
So it came in and looked favorable
yeah.
to that budgeted amount.
And all I'm saying is that, and I will ask you to give me that, is that when you say your volume, we've had volume the year before and cost. So did our actual baseline, is it closer to where we actually are, or is it closer to what we have got over here for budget every year? Make sense? I'm just saying, if you look at 2016, is your is that number going to be about the same as this 14,000, or is it going to be closer to the 14,863? Somehow, I'd like to see that we look at not just 17, but what was it in 16, as you are looking to set up your thresholds and targets and stuff. That's all I'm saying.
Yes, ma'am. 16 was closer to 17, but my budget 17 did not have much of an increase in our expenses. Budget 18, we had pretty substantial increase in our expenses that were approved. A lot of that came through in salaries, a lot of it came through in our medical supplies. So, I didn't bring the budget with me today, but we have planned for some strategic items and physician payments that are impacting that threshold number, which equals my budget 18. So and again, that's the committee's wishes, but if I were to try to set my threshold amount closer to that 14,075, which is the 17 baseline. Remember, these are also going to be used for the AIP. Then it would be extremely difficult for directors to I'm telling my directors it's not good enough just to meet your budget. You would actually have to come in much below your budget, even to meet threshold performance.
Okay.
And I
do understand. I know what you're trying to do. I was just trying to see, the same way we looked at other stuff, with the leapfrog. Mm-hmm. Leapfrog showed where one year we made a major improvement. The next year it was smaller. And for each year, it looks like it's going to get smaller and smaller because as you get better, other hospitals get better.
Right.
And that's why their numbers, it moves up and down.
But on the financial metrics, we have a pretty detailed plan that we've built from the department level forward.
Okay.
And then if you back into this overall metric, that plan calculates out to the 14,863. And we've put the budget at the threshold level. So they have to at least hit their budget, and they only would receive threshold performance if they hit the budgeted expenses with the budgeted volume.
All right. Okay. I hear you. Okay. Anyone else have any other questions? Comments? Well, Sharon, I do thank you for your work, and if I'm not mistaken, it will still be in the long term. Are we moving it from? They're going to be in both, right?
In both.
Yes, ma'am.
In both.
Let me get with Steve on that one, because I remember him telling us something I'll consult on about. For your annual and your long term, it was not good to have them same metrics in both of them. So let us get.
We struggle with that because
I know
this addresses quality and cost. Long term, we need to focus on quality and cost. There's no question about it. So it'll be interesting to hear his reaction to that.
Okay. All right. Yeah.
Dorothy, I want to say thank you to you because your research and your work on what Leapfrog has done in the last decade really helpful to me.
Thank you.
Some of my issues with them, you've gotten to the bottom of, and they've actually resolved. The backfilling of vacant data,
Right.
for example,
Right. Mm-hmm.
always a heartburn.
Yes, they stopped there.
Is stopped. So I appreciate the effort that you put into that. And that's a lot of work, but I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Trent, I was going to, you beat me to that, to talk about the leapfrog. I was also going to say that I've been in hospital, obviously, last month on several occasions, meeting with Robert on some other issues, and Dorothy and DT had been locked up in meetings with Bill and consultants and all kinds of things. So this wasn't something that just happened. it's been a process, and I agree with you, Dorothy, thanks for your
Okay,
leadership.
all right.
If it's, let me ask a question. If
Go
it's the
ahead,
same,
BT.
if it's the same metric on annual and for long term, should we just keep on the annual and just get closer and closer to more incentive to stay? What do you guys feel about that?
Keep it on, you say keep it on the annual, and that would be the main one, and on the LTIP, we could have just one?
Or the more we can drop and move it up front, the less it is to depend. So it can be a truly long-term incentive plan. That's what I meant.
We had something acceptable to substitute at the LTIP, I would say, sure.
Okay.
But until we do, I think this is probably going to be a metric that does change with performance. So
Right.
from Steve's standpoint, he doesn't want static indicators that, become redundant when one and the other, because you can argue that doesn't give room for progression.
Or improvement.
This one does.
Oh, no, I'm just saying that the less we have on the LTIP, the more it resembles what it was supposed to be intended for. That's what I meant, when we move the metrics
Yeah,
up front.
and DT, I agree with you. I think we all truly now believe that the LTIP is for retention, not for performance compensation. I think the fact it's in there for right now, Dorothy, till you talk to Steve, maybe you can get his thoughts on that.
The one thing that.
We don't want to make it cumbersome.
Yeah,
We want
and the one
people to
thing
have
on
the
behalf
opportunity
of.
to meet those, yeah.
Sure.
so.
On behalf of staff, and out of respect for the board too, we just ask that if you go back to Steve, which is fine, set a metric for yourself on a time frame, because we'll never get this. And that I'm fearful. And the other issue that I have is if we keep talking to Steve too much, we're never going to make our budget.
That's right.
So we're going to go broke. So I just want to get to the point.
Control is one of those calls.
I'm going to talk to him. He asked me to call him after the meeting anyway, so I'm going to talk to him. But I just want to make sure
Right.
that, because
We
I
agree.
know you can have one cost on the annual, because it's so broad on the LTIP, it's still going to impact it. By the time you start breaking it down, one is on labor costs, then pretty soon y'all gonna be looking at pharmacy costs. So there are several deals that's in there that would make it work for us.
Okay.
Okay? All right.
You might
But
wanna
I'll
look
get
at
back
it
with you.
I'm gonna bring it up at y'all's retreat. I'm gonna put that metric in for y'all.
Okay, all right. Any other question?
It's great.
Okay. We got it. We're gonna keep it, okay? All right, thank
So do
you.
we still keep your cot in Bill's office, or do we take it out?
I think Bill and I'll probably be still sharing
Just checking.
the count.
I get top bunk.
Okay. We'll get there, gang. This is important, and I
It
think
is.
it's awesome, but, okay. We have, we took care of those two, and
Pia's
so
up next.
Pia, you're up next. And this is just a follow-up, okay?
So, good afternoon, everyone. Would like to just provide you with an update. As you can see in the past year, what we have brought to the HR committee is our human resources dashboard to keep you abreast of the turnover in the organization. Again, we benchmark this information against our Saratoga data. The metrics that we truly like to focus on for the turnover is our total voluntary turnover, and then also looking at our 1 year and 90-day voluntary turnover as well. So when you look at our total voluntary turnover, again, this is looking at first quarter, and the first quarter consists of October through December. When you're looking at this data, first quarter, our turnover was 11.88, and again, benchmarking that against Saratoga, we are slightly higher than the Saratoga data. Anytime when we look at the turnover information, and we're always seeking to see what are those top 5 reasons for leaving, it's always a consistent theme. And what those themes consist of is relocation, other positions. And the thing that we look at is with the other positions, it's not always due to salary. It's about the employee, their overall experience. And that could be relating to their benefits. It could not have been a good match between the leader and the employee, which is fine. That does occur when individuals do join the organization. And then also too, relocating to other areas, and then also going back for educational opportunities as well. The one-year turnover, as you can see, was slightly higher against the Saratoga benchmark. That 1 year, that's a very imperative time for our team members to ensure that they are a good fit for the organization, and then also making sure that we feel that they're a good fit for the organization as well. Currently, what we do with our one-year individuals, we do have a breakfast and a lunch with Robert with our one-year team members. We welcome them in to give us feedback. And we get great feedback from these sessions to assist us with the 1 year experience. Some things that we've heard about in this 1 year is just their transition going from orientation into the department orientation. Also to consistency about cascading information down to assist them in being with development for them as an employee. So these are great sessions. We take that feedback. We, as a human resources team, along with our leadership team and executive team as well, we take that feedback and we listen and we look at it as improving upon to improve that 1 year turnover. And then the 90-day, we were lower for the first quarter against Saratoga, and that's really good because that 90-day, that's that probationary period for our employees to say if they're going to be a good fit for the JPS culture or not. So we did see that going downward, and that's really a good thing, and that's something that we want to approve upon is that 90-day, because we have to think about the overall recruitment process can be a very expensive process for us. We think about, for us, when we look at the labor costs and think about what that cost is for recruitment, one hire can cost an organization easily $75,000 in expenses for recruitment. So it's a great thing that we're seeing that 90-day has decreased, but our continued focus is on that voluntary turnover, and then also looking at that 1 year of service as well. Below, again, we're just giving you an overview of the turnover per the job families, just to make you aware of what that turnover is looking like as well. Are there any questions relating to turnover?
I have a question on probably more for definition than anything else. What's the difference between management technical and management?
So management technical are positions where they may have a job such as project manager, but they do not oversee people. And then our management truly are individuals that lead individuals in the organization. So we have to separate those two out so that we can be able to class them correctly. People leaders and then technical leaders as well. Yes.
Any other questions? All right.
Okay.
Okay.
So succession development for leaders, of course, wanted to give the board an update of where we are with the succession planning. This has been a remarkable process within the organization. We began this journey last year in January relating to succession planning. What we wanted to do was just to close the loop with you all, and then once we do this today, we'll look at bringing succession planning back to the board once a quarter, just to give you an update of what our strategy would look like to cascade this information down to our team members as well. So remember, the first piece of this journey began with our leaders, and the only focus at this time were leaders. In that first phase, what we did we did the 9-box assessment, their 360s, and then also their personality test. In that 9-box assessment, what occurred is that leaders had the ability, the executive leaders, and then their 1-up had the ability to go in and give feedback on these individuals relating to their overall performance. The 360 assessment basically, again, was the leader giving feedback on their attributes to ensure that that individual had the correct skill set and the competency to lead in their current position. The phase 2 was the top performance profiles in the job category, and this is where we identified 32 top performers in the organization that were ready now leaders, and then also our high pole leaders. What we're going to be doing with those 32 individuals beginning in early April, springtime, what we're going to be looking at is putting them in a lead program. And these individuals were developed through and identified in the 9-box assessment as those that score the top 9 or 10 in that 9-box assessment. So these are your ready now leaders, so that if positions did come open in their departments, they're ready now and they're plotted in to be able to keep the work going, to keep the business going in their departments. So with the phase 2, that's the piece that we're looking at, and we're excited about the lead because we know that this is going to strengthen that benchmark to give them the necessary tools and competencies for them to be able to develop further in their roles. Then for each of these leaders in phase 3, we also did the career development plan, and this is imperative when you are going through a succession plan. Succession planning is all about looking at your current workforce, again, identifying those top performers and those high pos and putting together a career development plan to assist them in identifying what is it that they need to be able to move forward, what is it that they need to be able to develop, and what is it that we as an organization need to do to assist them in getting there. So these are the career development plans. For some of us, you may hear IDP, Individual Development Plan, but this was the third phase that we did with these individuals as well. So phase 4, and we're currently completing this phase right now, is basically doing the CDPs, checking in with these individuals. We're closing the loop with this process now with our outside agency, Exeter, just to do check-ins, and that will occur on a quarterly basis as well. So again, succession planning, we began this process last year. We have identified those top 32 leaders, and again, the focus was only our leaders. And what work will be done from here up until 2020 is to cascade this down to our frontline team leaders so that we can ensure that we have an engaged workforce in assisting and developing them as well. For the organization and for JPS also too, we do have a policy on internal mobility. So with that policy with internal mobility, what we did, putting the succession planning will assist us in being able to recruit internally for us to be able to have that ready now talent within our organization. What you have here is just basically, it provided you with an update of how we're looking to cascade this down to our frontline team members. We are an organization of 6,500 employees. It's going to be 2020 before we do get this process finalized. And as we have each quarterly HR committee meeting, we will be bringing updates just on how this looks within the organization. Are there any questions?
Not a question, but just a comment that actually one program or one plan is successful for the next plan. If in order for the long-term incentive plan to be really successful, you need to have this succession plan. Mm-hmm. If I want to be a dreamer upward.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree, and they need to know that there's no barriers. If they do well and they perform well, they've got a clear slot to go forward. I agree. I also want to thank Pia, because she's done an incredible amount of work in the last year on succession planning, and she's taken it from a vision to the pragmatic aspects of what you do and how you do it, and she's done a good job.
I mean, as we recruit persons to the organization, we're recruiting life, not short term.
I agree.
Pia, one of the questions I have is we have the voluntary turnover.
Mm-hmm.
That's 12% last year, and this quarter 11%.
Mm-hmm.
Of those people who voluntarily leave,
Mm-hmm.
how many of them were leaders? I know you just started looking, but
Yes.
of that group, I guess what I'm saying is that if we invest in building leaders, we need to make sure they have a pathway for leadership.
Exactly.
Otherwise, those become our voluntary departures because they'll find that leadership someplace else.
Exactly.
So it's a double-edged sword.
Okay.
It is. And with that, because the two coincide together, turnover and succession development, the piece that we looked at, looking at that turnover, it was very small. And out of that turnover with the leadership, when we looked at that, the hypo group, it was about 3%. So it was very small.
Okay.
But one of the key things when we are going through onboarding of team members, two of the key questions that we always receive is, how does the organization develop their employees, and how will my leader develop me to progress in my career? And it's very thankful for us to be able to speak to these type of things, because this contributes, and I say this all the time, with JPS being an employer of choice. So when you're becoming that employer of choice, these are things that you want to be able to speak to about succession planning, and then how are you going to develop individuals to be successful in their career. And I always speak to myself relating to my career and my time here at JPS, my progression, and then the leader that I had that I would say developed me for my next level as well. Yes.
Quick question for you. At a certain level, you would rather not involuntarily, or dismiss an employee. You give them a chance to resign. Is that which column does that really go to?
If they resigned?
Right, usually, they know that they're gonna get terminated, but we give them a reason to resign. Does it look as involuntary, or is it voluntarily resign?
Well, if they voluntarily resign, it goes to the voluntary bucket, but that's very few in our organization where that occurs. Usually for us, especially with our leaders, what we work towards is putting a plan together such as this to assist them in achieving. And for some of our employees, it's very rare in HR that we get those that come and say, I'm about to be terminated, I want to resign. It's going to be either or, because most of the time is that they improve in their performance or we exit them, from the organization. So speaking to that, that's very few, because that is something that we discuss as a HR leadership team, those type of situations occurring. So that's very few that's happening in our organization, because we have a special tagline for something like that happening.
If we look at it, and most majority of them, let's say borderline go to the other way, termination, but we look at it as volunteer, then we wouldn't know that we have a concern.
Right, and also too.
We may think that, something is wrong with the way that we retain people because they volunteer, but they don't qualify for that job.
Right,
But we
exactly.
allow them to sit on the other columns.
Right, exactly.
So how do we bridge the gap?
And that's something that we would have to look at from a performance standpoint with our leaders and bridging that gap. Again, it goes back to, that's very few that occurs in this organization where, they are having performance issues and then we just allow for them to resign. So that's something that we have to look at further. And if I can, I would like to research that.
Well, it's also affecting your
our numbers.
Your Texas unemployment.
Right, exactly. But I would like to look at that more. I don't want to misspeak on it, just to look and see how that is. But I know if they resign, it's a resignation. We can't say it's involuntary. There's a process that we know to file on that. But I want to research that more and be able to articulate and speak to that on what that does look like. I know it's probably 1% of what is happening, but I would like to research and come back with that.
Yeah, because when the economy is bad and all of a sudden we got a bunch of premium going up because of Texas unemployment.
And then also too, when our turnover is high, you are correct, it does affect our unemployment, because that is something that we're still paying for as well. Yes.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Thank you, Pia.
Thank you.
All right, at this time, We have a close item, so I would like to reconvene in closed session. And if we make it fast, we won't be in here long. We discussed the contract. Can I get a motion on our,
Move to change it to 4 years.
all right. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor of extending the contract for 4 years, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed by nay.
Retroactive to
Right.
Yes.
Okay. All right. There is no other business, so we are now adjourned.